writer and editor Jane Van Voren Rogers, and I am so excited today to be here with my guest, Juanita E. Mantz, who wrote the memoir chapbook, Portrait of a Public Defender, or How I Became a Punk Rock Lawyer. I am just so excited to have you here today, Juanita. Welcome.
Thank you. I'm excited to be here. Thanks for having me on. I'm honored.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I'm honored to have you. So I know you are a writer, you're a podcaster, you're a lawyer, you're an MFA student. You've got a lot going on. You have the Life of Gem podcast where you talk with writers and artists. And I was excited to learn about that too after meeting you.
Yeah, we have a lot in common.
Absolutely. So how long have you been doing your podcast?
It started during the pandemic, ironically enough, because I used to go to a lot of shows and travel a lot of like punk and post-punk shows. So I was always gone every week and I never stayed home. And then when the pandemic hit, I did an audio podcast on Anchor app, and I just read my stories. There wasn't really a theory to it. I didn't really have a form. And then one of my friends from elementary school, April Duran, who runs Rag House Media, who's also an actress and a paraprofessional teacher, she said, "Hey, Juanita, let's do a podcast." And she owns a production studio and a broadcast studio. So I was like, okay. So we did it. Yeah. And, it evolved. First, it was just me kind of having my friends on. Then writers started reaching out to me saying, "Hey, can I be on your show?" And I started reaching out to writers that I know, like Isabel Quintero, who wrote Gabby, A Girl in Pieces. I had her on. The other night I had Peter Churches on, who is a famous New York writer. So it's fun. And you know what it's like, other writers, we're the same tribe. Like we automatically connect with one another,
Absolutely. Well, I definitely felt that way with you too, after reaching out to you and just finding out a little bit more. And I know you had said it's kismet, and I definitely felt that way too.
Aww,
so
definitely.
That's exciting. So tell us a little bit more about you. What would you like people to know?
I have a somewhat interesting history. So I grew up in Ontario, California, the Inland Empire part of Southern California, which is the opposite of an empire, but we call it the IE. And so I grew up in the IE in Ontario, California. I was a gifted student, GATE student, loved to read, always. Used to sit at the park and read F. Scott Fitzgerald and Harlequin romance novels and Judy Blume and S.E. Hinton at like 7. So I started reading at 3. My mom taught me and my twin sister to read at 3. And so, but then I had some struggles in high school. We had a lot of chaos. My dad lost his bar, and then my family lost our house. So we were kind of like moving from rental to rental. I started going to a lot of shows, started drinking a lot, and I dropped out of high school my senior year. And I think the point of my story is that there's many acts to life, right? So that decision at that time, and I have a YA memoir that's coming out in November that ends with me dropping out. There it's a tragedy, but in the end, it made me who I am. I'm a great public defender, a deputy public defender on the ground because of my history. I can connect with these clients because I know what it's like. I walked to work. I took my GED. I went to junior college. I waitressed for 10 years. And then when I got to UC Riverside and I didn't have to work for the first time in my life, I was like, this is easy. Then I got to USC Law and I'm like, they're going to pay me money, like student loan money, to just live and not have to work. It was, to me, I grew up very blue collar, and I still identify in my soul as blue collar. And my book is about the intersection of blue collar life, punk rock, and public defense. So
that's awesome. We're going to let me show your book here in the stream so people can see that. So Portrait of a Deputy Public Defender. I always forget the word deputy in that. Deputy Public Defender, or How I Became a Punk Rock Lawyer. And this is available for pre-order right now, and it actually comes out on August 10th. So when we show this here, if you're watching on YouTube, you'll be able to see the link there in the comments to go and pre-order.
So, yes. And just really quick, this cover. So there's a punk band, LA punk band X, which is pretty much one of my top 5 bands, along with the Smiths, The Cure, X, Susie and the Banshees, all these bands. But this cover is inspired by the X album, Under the Big Black Sun. And so I have a story in my YA memoir about me dropping out, and it's called Under the Big Black Sun. And Dennis Kalichi of Shrimper Records, who owns Bamboo Dart with Mark Givens of Pelicanesis, Dennis did the cover. And
Oh,
I cried when I saw it, because that's me, right? I have my little combat boots on. I got my short little skirt and my black suit coat, but I'm looking forward, and it's kind of also inspired by Ziggy Stardust, the album cover of that. And so, I mean, I'm just blessed. Mark Givens and Dennis Kalichi, I have to say, of Bamboo Dart, they created this imprint. They're short books, and it's very punk rock. It takes 6 months to a year to get these out. It's not, and I wrote it in 6 months. I had a lot of the pieces, but I put them all together, and I updated the law issues in them. So
it's a great image, and it's a very strong and, you know, triumphant image too. So talk to us a little bit more about punk rock and how you got into that, and where that stems from for you.
Well, for me, you know, I realized this later in life, but my mom and dad, my mom is Mexican, my dad is Caucasian, German, Yugoslavian, bunch of stuff. And so they were both into country music. My mom and dad met at a honky tonk in Portland. My mom's favorite singer was Freddie Fender. My dad's was Johnny Cash. My mom and dad used to dress up, and they looked like Johnny Cash and like Loretta Lynn, going out to dinner, going out to dance. But there's a strong correlation between that country, Johnny Cash, and punk, right? You have Social D that has done covers of Johnny Cash. And so I think that the narrative, right? So punk rock is really about, for me, it's a philosophy now. It's about butting up against a system, and it's about blue collar life, and about protecting those that are the most voiceless, right? Because what is freedom for but to fight for others to be free? Because, you know, I wrote this book not knowing what would happen to me, whether I could get fired, whether people might take offense. And if they do, that's fine. I'm only telling my truth. That people can disagree. But I am not going to be silent anymore. When the George Floyd incident happened, it showed me that I needed to speak up more. And then coming back to court after the pandemic, I don't have my same armor. I find it very hard. Some days I came home and throw up after court, seeing all these people in chains and their families crying. I was desensitized myself. So my book is about not letting the system program us. And that's what punk rock's about, right? F the man. And so is rap. There's all these other correlations in music to this. Fight the power, you know, Sex Pistols, Anarchy in the UK. That's not to say I don't believe in some kind of system. I am an abolitionist at this point. I'm not a reformer anymore with the criminal system. I don't call it criminal justice system. I call it the criminal system.
Can you pause a second and define that for us? What does that mean? You're an abolitionist, not a reformer, because I'm not familiar with those terms.
So the criminal system is based on slavery. It's a byproduct of that from Jim Crow, slavery to Jim Crow. And then the police were basically enforcing the slave trade, right? They were capturing people. And so there's a strong correlation between that. And the best book on that is The New Jim Crow. You can find that on any website, on Amazon. And so I started out as a deputy public defender about 13 years ago. I was a corporate lawyer for 7 years. I hated it. I left that to come to the public defender's office. And I was a reformer. I was like, okay, let's reform these drug laws. Let's get rid of, let's legalize weed. That's ridiculous that we're incarcerating people for weed or for personal possession of drugs. There's no victims here. They're only hurting themselves. Why are we doing this? At this point, reform doesn't work. You have to kind of start over and say, how are we going to help people and not hurt them? You have to take care of people. You have to put people somewhere safe. And the mentally ill are being warehoused in the jail, and it's hurting them more, right? And I'm not talking on, I do handle murders and stuff like that, and attempt murders and rapes. I'm talking about, we have people incarcerated in the county jail on misdemeanors and petty felonies, vandalism, PC 69, resisting arrest. I have a case where they go to a hotel, woman's passed out, they wake her up and they charge her with resisting arrest. And she's super mentally ill. And it's like, why is that woman incarcerated? Because she can't make bail. So we got to get rid of bail. That's my first thing as an abolitionist. Get rid of bail. Everyone, as long as they're not a danger, should be able to be out of custody pre-trial. If there is a presumption of innocence in America, which there's not, I would argue, in a lot of ways, why are people incarcerated pre-trial based on economics? It's because we've created an incarcerated class. It's below lower class. It's way below blue collar even. It is an incarcerated class. And Angela Davis, who was a Black Panther and is now a professor at Berkeley, she talks about it. And she basically says communities of color have been criminalized. I mean, I could go on forever. You got to read the book.
Well, and I remember reading about that in your book, where you talk about that with the incarcerated class, and I think that's a really interesting point. I was trying to find a screenshot of that really quick because I know I had taken a screenshot of that. Okay, so you say, and this is just a quick excerpt. Is it okay if I go ahead and read that real quick? Okay, so in most ways, the criminal system we have created in this country is anti-lower class, which creates a subclass below lower and working class, which I would call the incarcerated class. People who are, in fact, incarcerated due to lack of economic privilege pre-trial. People who would otherwise be free to fight their case on the outside, except for the fact that they are poor. And wow. I mean, that's a really, I think that's a really stunning illumination for a lot of us, like myself, who aren't a lawyer. I'm not working and seeing all the things that you are, but understanding that this is a whole, systemic problem that's going on.
And that's why I call myself an abolitionist. We need systemic change that's based on the foundation of the way we treat people. We use incarceration as a first resort, not a last resort. Incarceration should always be a last resort when we can do nothing else. And so, and it's interesting that you forget about the deputy. So the difference between a public defender and a deputy public defender is a public defender is the head of an office. They're either appointed, usually, or elected, and then usually appointed. District attorneys are elected. But a deputy public defender means I'm combat boots on the ground. I'm in the trenches.
Literally.
Yeah. Last Thursday, I had 50 mentally ill clients on, 2 attorneys. I had to take a mental health day on Friday.
That's nearly unbelievable. I mean, it's hard to even fathom that.
I'm still pissed about it. It was a perfect storm where we're down an attorney and people were on vacation. And so I'm not blaming anyone for this except saying this is unacceptable. And I'm going to speak out about it. I'm not a politician and I am not a supervisor. I am an attorney, boots on the ground, and I have the right to say what I want. Aside from privileges, which I'm very careful of, I change a lot of details in the book so that no client can be identified. I'm very cognizant. I'm using these stories to illuminate the human condition and the tragedy of mass incarceration. And I love my clients. I love them like my family. And this is a service industry, and any deputy public defender that's not in it to serve people, get out. Because this is a battle. It's a battle for people's lives and souls. And I say in one of my stories, I use a David Bowie quote, and I say, you got to change the world. We have to change the world. So.
Yeah, you do. Let me see. I think I might have a screenshot of that one too, because that was so great when you're talking about that. And I know it's a famous quote, and it's
from I think it's from the song Changes.
Yeah. Do you have that?
I do. That way I can read it directly. Sorry.
That would be great.
And I try to use a lot of music. I try to show the intersection of the Clash covered a reggae song that talks about the police in the streets and ammunition. I talk about the Sex Pistols. I talk about my obsession with Sid Vicious in high school, who ended up being his own tragedy about addiction, suicide, murder.
I like your reflection about that too, how you said that you were so fascinated with the movie Sid and Nancy, and initially that you admired Sid so much just for the, essentially the FU attitude, but that then with time and with age and kind of looking back on that you understand that story differently.
Yeah, very differently. And, I've always been a kind of Sally J. Friedman kind of character from Judy Blume, where I'm imagining myself into roles and stories and movies and with people. And I used to dream that I was with Sid Vicious. And now I think, I must have been so twisted, because that would not have been a healthy relationship if he could have came back to life. So the quote is this: change is the only thing that will help my clients. Real change will probably only come with a global and generational shift in thinking. The change will only come when society sees my clients the way I see them, as people to be saved rather than imprisoned. We should be seeking salvation, not incarceration. For, as the late, great David Bowie said, I have his tattoo on my back, these children that you spit on as they try and change their worlds are immune to your consultations. They're quite aware what they are going through.
I think that is so fitting too. That is such a fitting lyric for the people that you're working with and that you're trying to help every day.
Yeah. I mean, it's hard. It's not easy work. And real work that matters is never easy.
Absolutely.
It eats at your soul. I've debated whether to leave the field, because I'm like, okay, I'm making changes one client at a time, but this is bigger than that. I need to do some big change, macro change. Should I be, doing, some kind of policy work, or marching to Washington, or creating my own nonprofit? But for now, I've decided to stay and do the best I can for as long as I can. I don't know if I can do it more than 5 years. I'm hopeful for 10. I'm going to try to make it 5 more years, because I've been doing this 13 years now. And, that's 2/3 of my legal career. I was corporate lawyer for Shell Oil and other companies at big law firms in Houston and San Francisco for almost 7 years. And I hated every day of it. But the day I came to my public defender's office in Riverside, I knew I was in the right place the first day. I was like, this is meant to be. Just like kind of, you meet someone that you connect with, you read a book you love, and you always say, oh, this was meant to be, right? You just know it.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and as a former inhabitant of corporate life, I can totally relate to that too. And I think it sort of pushes everyone to a certain degree to want to be a little bit punk and a little bit, out of the box, or a lot out of the box, and to really, I felt in a past corporate life that I was always like pushing the envelope and trying to get HR to, let me communicate the things that I wanted to, and let me show the things that I wanted to. And so I think that's, a really valuable thing, that a statement that you make about punk in your book is, and I don't know if you would like to read that part at all for us, kind of your definition of punk. But I think that what's great about that is just that, it doesn't have to mean being into, punk rock from, the 70s or 80s. It's more of an attitude. It's more of a belief, and it's more, there's an ideology there. And obviously, punk is wide and deep. There's a lot of varieties to that. But I think there's also, kind of it's sort of a rebel spirit. And I think it's it's an embracing of trying to help people in a real way. But how do you define it in your book? Let's talk about it.
I'll read that part, but really punk for me, I'm into the early punk. So I'm into early UK punk, early New York, proto-punk, which is pre-punk, David Bowie, New York Dolls, Television, bands like that. And then came along the Ramones and these other New York bands. But in the UK, it was Sex Pistols, Buzzcocks, The Damned. I'm really into those bands. And I'm into the post-punk, which is Joy Division. But music aside, what I say in my book is this. I say, what is punk for me? Punk means no rules, and/or the breaking of rules, rebellion, no boundaries, inclusivity, at least it did in the beginning, and a blue-collar F the man ethos. Punk for me started with bands like the New York Dolls and with Patti Smith, who was more of a poet than a punker, but she was one of my heroines in high school. She actually started part of the punk movement. So I'm going to skip a little, but there was a political side to punk that drew me in. even as a teenager who was struggling to find herself and her voice. In high school, I would see people of color in my neighborhood pulled over and harassed, and I knew that the police were not a benevolent force. The Clash speaks to this when they sing, "Police and thieves in the streets scaring the nation with their guns and ammunition." That song, in retrospect, looking back, can be seen as a prophecy about America, right? And our turn towards police militarization. And likewise, Johnny Cash, who influenced every punk band almost, especially Social Distortion and others, he sang at Folsom Prison. He sang to prisoners. He told these stories. And Johnny Cash himself was incarcerated, right? For drug crimes, which we now know. And this is one of my points on the law is relative, but it shouldn't be, because a moral code is in our bones. And that's where social movements come from, things that we know in our bones. So the fact that we used to incarcerate people for weed or for personal use of drugs, and that no district attorney had any problem, a prosecutor had no problem sending someone to prison on a drug case where there was no sales. They, on 0.2 grams of meth, this much meth, I'm not even kidding, times 32 months with a strike prior for that. They had no problem doing that. They had no problem enforcing weed laws. But all of a sudden, the laws change, and now they're fine with them as misdemeanors, or they're fine with them not being prosecuted. That doesn't make sense. There is a higher law, God's law, whatever you want to call it. We know it in our bones when something is wrong. And when I started as a public defender, deputy public defender 13 years ago, I was horrified. I went after this stuff. And then I got a little tired, and I moved to mental health, and I started fighting for the mentally ill, and that gave me more of a focus. And my clients are the most voiceless. My clients are incompetent to stand trial. That means not only are they incarcerated, they can be sent to a state hospital for up to 2 years, and they haven't been convicted of anything. Think about that.
No.
Think about that. That's horrifying.
It really is.
And why don't we have a place for people? Because no one wants these people in their neighborhood. We want to forget about these people. These are the people no one wants. And that's why it's punk rock to represent them. And that's why it's punk rock to stand up before a judge and say, let my client go. This is wrong. This is wrong. But it doesn't matter, because the laws are changing, and bail, there's a new California Supreme Court case that says incarceration should be the last resort with bail. Riverside judges are using that case against us and setting no bail. How are they doing that? Because there's no accountability. No one's standing up and saying this is wrong. We might be standing up in court, but we're not standing up as a force with our voices in the media on stuff like this. No one has written a book like this, Right. And I personally, I'm almost 50, so I just don't give a crap anymore what anyone thinks. I'm too old for this. Yeah, anyways.
Right.
You want me to read a poem?
Absolutely. And I'm just going to say really quick too, it looks like we've got about 12 live viewers right now between Facebook and YouTube. So if anyone has any questions for Juanita as well, that you'd like to ask about her life as a lawyer, a writer, a poet, an MFA student, a podcaster, and of course about her book and her experience, feel free, hopefully we can, see those questions and help get some conversation going. But while we wait for that, yes, please go ahead and read for us.
So I'm going to read one of the first poems in the book. So the first story in the book is a story about me dropping out of high school and why it's my magic wand, because I know what these clients have gone through if they have no way to court, no way to work. But that's the first story. And the second piece, and this is a multi-genre chapbook that's a little longer than a typical chapbook, and it's a mix of memoirs, social justice essays, and poetry. So this is one of the poems, and it's called Static. Static. Okay. Can you hear me? Screaming in my head. Let my people go. Let me go. Saying, let us go. Release everyone from the system that hurts us all. As a deputy public defender, I used to think I could work within it. Now I see it's broken. Can you hear me? Screaming in your ear? Listen to me, please. Listen. Let me do what I do, then let me go from this misery of banging my head. My ears are ringing from the beat of cuffs on bars of cells across America. Are you there? Can you hear me? Screaming your name, it all still remains. Excuse me, excuse you, forgive me, forgive us all. We know not what we do, or maybe we do. And that's a biblical quote at the end. You know, I'm a black
They know not what they do.
Yep, exactly. On the cross, he said, you know, they know not what they do, forgive them. But this, we know what we're doing to this incarcerated class. And, you know, my goal ultimately is to expand this chapbook into an academic book, talking about social class and otherizing. I wrote my note at USC Law School on that issue about otherizing, how we create this legal other, and I use literature to do it, but I'm going to use, you know, real world examples and the writings of people like Gloria Anzaldúa, La Frontera, Borderlands, Cherie Moraga, Angela Davis, and I use them in this book, but it's abbreviated. So ultimately, I would want to expand this book into more of an academic text, maybe in the next 5 or 10 years. So I'm also a dog mom. Me and my husband, we don't have kids. I'm infertile. I went through in vitro, no kids, but we have 2 very spoiled Shih Tzus, Frodo and Chewbacca. So they take up a lot of my morning usually. Yeah. I see some comments there.
Yeah. Cool. We're getting some. Okay, so we've got the. So first we've got. Let me see if I can show that. Okay, from Ronit Plank, who will actually be on Author Talks in August. She says, "How do you recharge, take care of yourself between the work that you do?"
You know, I probably would not still be doing this work if I hadn't started writing. I started writing when my dad died, before I became a deputy public defender. But since I became a deputy public defender, I've channeled, I go away every summer for a writing workshop. My husband and I go to a lot of music shows, aside from the pandemic. Mm-hmm. I do a lot of reading. The thing is, the writing and the reading I love. My work as a deputy public defender is the hardest. I used to take every other Friday off if I could. Now we get 980s, so I can take every other Monday off, and that is helping me. I have to put good boundaries, though. I have a tendency to say yes to everything. So I've learned to say no, and I am very efficient. I read really quick. I'm like a speed reader, and I also delegate. So I wanted to make a website for my book and for all my stuff, JuanitaEMantz.com. Paid someone to do it. I'm blessed, privileged that I have the money to pay someone to do it. And I don't cook. My husband cooks. I'm very bad at cleaning. I take a lot of bubble baths and go to a lot, for me, punk shows and post-punk shows, going to see The Cure, I'm going to see X in 2 weeks. That's how I decompress. Yeah. And the casino occasionally. But we won't talk about that.
Okay.
But, you know, it's hard. Alcoholism is rampant in the law industry. I struggle with, you know, alcohol, overusing it and smoking cigarettes to decompress. And it's the worst thing I can do to my body. So I'm working on that.
Yeah. We've got one other question from Ronit. Sorry about that with the pronunciation. Follow up, what nonprofits or organizations do you recommend people get involved with or acquainted with to help?
There's a lot of bail organizations that you can just search bail reform that you can donate to, where they're actually bailing people out of jail. Reform is another big organization. I would say look locally, though. Look at your local criminal justice organizations. And, you know, I'll think about that more, and maybe I'll post something on my website about that, a list of organizations. But I would say get into the bail reform movement and start researching ways that you can help. And if that means that you have a story to tell about a family member that was incarcerated or someone you know, write an op-ed. write a letter to the editor. I mean, I think we all need to tell these stories, because narrative, telling someone's story, is the most important thing you can do. I had an autistic client recently who I became very attached to. And it was a horrible case, and it's tragic. And I actually said out loud, if this doesn't go right, I will quit. And it went right. So God wanted me to stay. But I really thought to myself, if I can, because it's these little victories that I get occasionally where I save a client from prison and they end up in a safer place, whether that's a conservatorship or a facility, or some get to go home. If I can save a client that's severely disabled, intellectually disabled, because that's my other population, is the intellectually disabled or people with Alzheimer's. People don't talk about it, but someone with Alzheimer's is incompetent to stand trial. And I had a client that had severe Alzheimer's and almost died in the jail, and we were able to get that person out. And we were very lucky that we all worked together. Me, the judge, the jail, and the district attorney worked together. But that's very rare.
Right.
So,
right. Yeah. I know we've got another question here from Felicia. Are you seeing an increase in Native American crimes?
You know, that's an interesting question, because in California, there's a grant for a specific district attorney and banning to handle those cases. So we don't see those cases. Usually they go to the tribal, or a special district attorney handles just the tribal cases. So I have not seen that, but what I can tell you is for the mentally ill population, the rate of incompetency has increased 30% over the last 2 or 3 years. So the rate of mental illness and of diagnoses, and there's this study that says 1 in 3 people in jail have a severe mental disorder. There's new studies that say 50%. I actually think it's closer to 75% if you add in addiction, trauma, right? All of these people have trauma, and you have people that are victims that then become perpetrators, right? And that's why these sex trafficking diversion cases are popping up, where they're trying to say, oh, we're going to prosecute this poor woman that was sexually trafficked for this crime when she herself was a victim. So it's about looking at, why do people do what they do? I am a believer that all people are in their hearts good, most people. And so I think that the difference between us and prosecutors is they may think people are bad. I think most people are good, and that if you give them the opportunity and they're ready, that they will do good, right? They will do good. They will. I've seen it.
Well,
yeah.
No, I know when you were mentioning earlier too, just about the mental health system and the crisis there. My understanding is that a lot of that has to do with kind of the grand sort of deinstitutionalization that happened more back in, I'm not sure exactly what time frame that was, but when
Reagan
kind of shifted away from all that. And so essentially, those former institutions that were there to help people were eliminated. And so then a lot of the mentally ill people were just sent to the streets. And so then a lot of times that's why you've got, again, like veterans with PTSD who are homeless, and, other people who, again, maybe had those institutions to go to. So,
there's no way to get long-term mental health treatment. I'm talking about like a year, unless you commit a crime. Think about that. The seminal text on this issue that everyone should buy a copy of is insane. The Criminal Treatment of the Mentally Ill in America. It's by Alyssa Roth, Roth. Look up that book, buy it. I talk about in my book how she talks about a client, person that she researched that was in an elevator naked, and they arrested him. And instead of taking him to ETS, which is the short-term facility, if someone's 5150, they took him to jail, and he blinded himself. And he was a veteran. And I know those clients. I've had those clients that mutilate themselves. Yeah, so.
So awful. And so, I guess thinking about how those institutions used to be there to care for people, what kind of thing can you see, sort of for the future? Like, what kind of thing would you recommend? Because I don't necessarily see those kinds of things coming back So what
No,
can
they
you
are
do?
coming back.
Are they?
They are. And right
Okay.
now I'm transitioning into a new role at the Riverside County Public Defender's Office where we're building a hospital. The county is actually, it's called Incompetent to Stand Trial Diversion. And we're going to build a facility where people can go for about 6 months, get better, and then we're going to link them to housing. And they're going to go from that facility to the community. And we're going to give them full services, wrap around mental health, wellness, all of this stuff, job training, all of this. And then within 2 years, their case gets dismissed.
Mm.
It's a new way of looking at justice. It's a new, I believe in restorative justice too with severe crimes, but let's put that aside. Let's just talk about this population of the severely mentally ill that are being warehoused in jail right now. And the difference between being at a place like a state hospital even or a facility, they get to go outside. At a jail, they are in their cell, at least during COVID, 23 hours a day. And if that won't drive anyone worse, what would? You cannot put a mentally ill person in a cell. You can't put anyone in a cell for that many hours a day and not expect them to get worse. And so, the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over. And that's all we're doing. We're just repeating these same mistakes. And in 20 years, 50 years, we're going to look back and think, that was a genocide of this mentally ill population. It's so tragic. Why didn't anyone speak up? Right?
Absolutely.
I mean, I really believe in this. It's not, I have people in my family with mental illness. I have people in my family that have been incarcerated. One time I talk about in the book, extended family I'm talking about, there was a guy in custody and they're like, this guy, Milky Eye, he's saying he's your cousin. And I was like, what? And then my colleague said, this guy says he's your cousin. And I look over and I go, he is my cousin. Hi, Milky Eye. And so then my colleague, I had to put a wall between us, but he was able to get him a program, get him out within, a couple weeks and get him to Salvation Army and a full-time program. And it was a serious case and he had a strike prior, but we were able to do a Romero motion and get him out and really work for him. The real problem, too, is funding. When the prosecutor's offices have 2 or 3 times the funding that the public defender's offices have, what is the result of that? The result is that you're able to prosecute, and then the defense, the people who represent the indigent, I'm not talking about private attorneys, that's a whole nother show. There's a lot of good ones, a lot of bad ones. And I would say that most deputy public defenders, and really the purpose of this book is to show we are punk rock lawyers. We do not do this for the money. I could be making $500,000 to $1 million a year as a corporate lawyer with 20 years experience. I make what I made as like a second year attorney in corporate after 13 years at the public defender's office. And so don't tell me I'm doing this for the money. I do it because I don't want to charge anyone for services. I tell my husband, because he's like, you don't want to go private? I'm like, number one, I don't believe in money, really. It's an illusion. It's just a signifier. But number two, I'd be working for roast chickens, tamales, and Diet Cokes. I'd be like, okay, bring me a Diet Coke. I'll take your case. I could never have a mother mortgage her house to pay her son's legal bills. And private lawyers, they have to do that. They have to be business people. And I am not a business person when it comes to someone's right to good representation as a lawyer on a criminal case where they're incarcerated. 90% of my clients are incarcerated, maybe 95%. So I have about 5% that are out of custody. The majority of my clients are in chains, in jumpsuits, in red jumpsuits, protective custody even, or, it's sad.
So how did you get drawn into helping this particular group of people? How did you get drawn to that, especially coming from corporate law?
Well, I was in law school. I represented a woman at Chino State Prison for the USC Post-Conviction Justice Project. And she was sitting on the couch holding her baby when her husband murdered someone in the back room on a drug deal gone bad. She was tried, hung jury because she testified. And she was tried under the felony murder rule, which is like conspiracy. But what was she conspiring? No one knows. The second time, she didn't testify and she was convicted and sentenced to life. And they chained her during trial, which is unconstitutional. She was shackled in front of the jury. So that was our motion, and we won it, and we got her out after 12 years. And that started my passion. And the only reason I went into corporate law is because I had never had money in my life.
Mm.
We grew up blue collar, working class poor, bill poor, my mom used to call it. In law school, I had no money. I didn't even qualify for private loans because I had really bad credit. Because, you know, growing up waitressing, poor, no car, you're going to have bad credit. My parents had bad credit. No one could co-sign for me. So I was living on nothing. I would steal coins out of, not steal, because it was my husband, my boyfriend at the time. I was staying with my boyfriend and his parents in West Covina, driving to LA. And every morning I would grab a bunch of change to eat with. And that was my money of the day to eat. And, you know, then, you know, my husband's great. He gave me a car to drive. And then after second year, I went to a law firm and I made enough money to get an apartment. And so I could move to LA and not commute. And so, yeah, I mean, I was never corporate. I always say I was Eliza Doolittle. I was playing a role. No one knew I was a high school dropout. No one knew my dad was a truck driver, or very few people. I had some friends, and my mom was a waitress. No one, they might have known that eventually, but the high school dropout, someone told me not to tell anyone because it was a stigma, and I was ashamed of myself. And then I realized, as RuPaul says, and he's another one of my idols, is that what you think is like your curse is your power. Tell your story. So being a high school dropout is my magic wand as a deputy public defender. I never FTA a client if I don't have to. I give them another chance to get there. I've picked up clients. I don't do that anymore. I'm not allowed
What's
to.
FTA for those of us not in the know?
So if someone is out of custody and they fail to appear at court, a bench warrant gets issued and they get picked up in custody. So an FTA is like, let's say it's 11 o'clock and your client's not there. I always say, Your Honor, may we have a bench warrant hold for a couple of days? Let me try to find this client. Even if they're homeless, you can try to find them. They usually have a number and a file. Now, we don't always find them, and sometimes the warrant issues, but I just do my best, right? I do my best to advocate for them so that when they do show up in custody, I can tell them, look, I tried to hold the warrant. Why didn't you call me? You know? So.
Yeah. Well, and it sounds like you have a very relatable, and I know you said maternal, you know, relationship with your clients. So can you talk a little bit more about that? It sounds like I mean, again, I'm sure you showing up and being you and being authentic and real, and again, sharing, you know, things with them that reads for people. I think that they know you're not just, again, you're not just some suit, and you're not just there to, you know, sort of do a job and be, you know.
So before I did incompetency, I did trials. And I think what helped, why I was very successful as a trial lawyer, is because I always showed my affinity for my client, whether that was the way I spoke about them. You never call them the defendant. You always call them by their first and last name or their last name. You show them respect. It is a privilege to represent them. You always put your hand on their shoulder. Jurors would tell me, I could just tell you loved your client. I won a bunch of cases just because I cared and I wouldn't back down. I fought. And then I did mental health court. Because in 1368, the clients are so impaired, it's really hard to create that connection. I can create that connection with their families, but with my clients that have severe delusions, schizophrenia, paranoid delusions, sometimes you're not able to create a connection. But before, when I did mental health court, where I put people into programs, I had a hard time with boundaries. I had to put really good boundaries. I would take my clients to lunch. I would give them myself. I was always on call for them. And, you know, that's not healthy. You have to have boundaries and be professional. And so I learned to do that. But I find actually 1368 incompetency a little easier because it's very technical and you're fighting for their rights. But they're so impaired that you cannot connect with them always. You try to, but you're really there to be their voice. And under incompetency law, we get to make their decisions for them because they are not competent to make it themselves. So think about that. So yeah, I am their one lifeline to justice. And if you have a bad lawyer handling these clients, that's a recipe for disaster because they can never complain. They don't even know where they are.
Right. Right. Well, and I know you mentioned in the book too about how you thrive on, again, being that voice and finding out
Yeah.
their stories and being that storyteller. So does that all tie in as well with, again, being a writer, being an observer, that you're looking at these case files and you're figuring out like what this person's story is?
What's really interesting about that, and I think my friend Gina is watching, Gina DeVore, who owns Blackbird Tarot, um, is that I resisted writing about my work. So I've been writing memoir and my childhood stories for 15 years. I started out going to VONA, which is a workshop for writers of color, studying with great writers like Andrew Pham, Faith Adele, David Murrah, and then I became a Maconvista, which is an organization ran by Sandra Cisneros, who's one of my idols, and I got to study under. So I've been working on my long form young adult memoir for 15 years. That's coming out in November. This issue of writing about my work, I would write little articles for the Riverside Lawyer every month because I'm on their publications committee, the Riverside Bar Association, but I really resisted publishing widely, talking about what I do until the pandemic. And my friend Gina, who read my cards, said, you need to merge your worlds. And I had resisted it because of privileges, because of fear, because of my own fear of being censored or chastised. I've never been censored by my office, by the way, but I was afraid I might be. I was afraid that someone would think that I was taking advantage of my clients' stories. But then when George Floyd and the pandemic happened, I realized, and I wrote an article for Al Jazeera. I went to the jail and it was very dirty and they had no soap and the deputy refused to get soap. And so I wrote a story about it and I pitched it online on this website I'm on. And within an hour, the editor from Al Jazeera called me, emailed me and said, can you write this article? I didn't sleep for a week. I took a couple of days off, wrote it, and it was in the universe within 7 days of me. And that started me thinking, the real power is in this book is about the intersection between punk rock and public defense, but my power is showing the intersection between narrative and the law. So my writing career, which I'd already established, and my legal career, and me trying to separate myself and saying I'm going to only be one or the other, that never worked. And it's only when I accepted the fact that I have to write about my law, my writing, my narrative, my troubled childhood, my high school dropout years all together to show the context, that the miracle and the magic happened. That's when I got my first book. That's when I got my second book deal. And these are both small presses. I'm not in it to be famous. I actually don't want that. I don't want a huge limelight. I just want people to read my words. I want a little girl to read my memoir and think, okay, if I make a mistake, or let's say a 19-year-old girl that dropped out of high school, I can go back to junior college. I can take my GED. I could end up at USC Law. Like, if that's not a miracle and a power of a redemptive story, what is? I've always been a dreamer, but yeah,
that's beautiful.
Yeah.
That's a really beautiful sentiment. And I love that idea too of it. And again, I, believe in readings and things like that too. And I think that when you understand though, that you need to integrate yourself and integrate these pieces of you. And like you said, and let that authenticity and let those difficult things come through, because that's where people find, what's relatable about you. Is when you are, willing to share, a personal experience, or willing to share your emotions about things, or willing to share something that was embarrassing or, a difficult experience for you. And that inspires other people and helps to reach them. So I think that's fantastic.
Well said. Exactly. And what's interesting about when I was a corporate lawyer, I wasn't listening to my music. I wasn't dressing the way I dress now outside of court. And I'm still a little funky at court. I'll wear like maybe a little tiger pant with a blazer occasionally. The other day I wore a red and black checkered blazer, like an English one. And this client said aloud in court, so it's not privileged, "Oh, you're like a fat Gwen Stefani." I was like, thank you. She's pretty thin. So, I mean, now I even try to bring that style into the courtroom. I don't have to be a suit. I don't have to fit this expectation. Yes, I have to wear a jacket. Yes, I have to wear shoes, but I can still do my winged eyeliner, wear my red lipstick, tone it down a little for court. I wouldn't wear this to court. I wouldn't wear a leather jacket to court, but I still try to be myself now at court. When I was a corporate lawyer, I bought all my suits at Dress Barn. I just felt like such a fake. I never felt like myself in those suits ever because it wasn't me.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. So finding ways to personalize that. And again, you're a lawyer, but you're a punk rock lawyer, and you're going to have your own style, and you're going to do things your way, and you're going to speak for the voiceless. And again, I think that's, such an admirable thing. So do you have another section of the book that you'd like to read for us? Another excerpt?
Yeah, I'll read a little bit from the first story, which is my high school girl punk rock story. And this is actually the first story in this chapbook, but one of the last stories in my memoir. And the difference is here it's a story about redemption, and I kind of turned it on its head. In my memoir, it's a tragedy that this girl self-destructs her senior year, but that she maybe has a glimmer that she might be okay, but she doesn't know. So here goes. And I'll just read a piece of it. Back under the bleachers. And this is right after my mom and dad and my twin sister is walking. My mom and dad and sister Annie are in the bleachers. My Tio Roland is up there. And I go hide underneath the bleachers because I can't be there with them because my mom's mad at me. I broke her heart. She put everything into me. And so that's
and your twin sister was graduating and you were not, correct?
My twin sister and my best friend Tracy both walked and graduated. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So right before this, my uncle Roland, who's since passed, he gave my sister $50 and said, "Congratulations, mija." And he wouldn't even look at me, So I was ashamed of myself. That's why I went to go hide. So that's what this scene starts with. Back under the bleachers, it smells like piss. I light up and tears drip on my cigarette. I wipe at my thick Susie Sue eyeliner with the edge of my Sex Pistols tee. Music from the school's marching band echoes in my ears. I stare down at my monkey boots and tap my feet on the concrete thinking, I am a loser. My life is over. I think of being at the Hollywood Palladium and seeing the Smiths and how I danced and screamed with joy when Morrissey took the stage. When my twin sister's name is called, I flinch. I know that I can't watch her walk. Look, I know I should go out into the sun and watch her graduate. I know I should be happy for her. She's my wonder twin. My mom said we had our own language as kids. At least one of us made it. But I can't be happy. I bury my head in my arms. I am not a cool punk rock girl anymore. It was all just an act. Sobbing, it's all coming out of me like water from a tap. As I stare down at the concrete beneath my feet, I think back to sitting at the park when I was little. I would always wonder to myself, is everyone's life like this? I always took a book to the park when my mom kicked us out of the house, when my parents fought, which was often. I thought of all the books I would read, some of them by flashlight, how I would squint into them and lose myself. I read Gone with the Wind, F. Scott Fitzgerald, Judy Blume, S.E. Hinton, and of course, my mom's Harlequin romance novels. Those books meant everything to me. They saved me. They showed me the possibilities of life. Then, later in high school, I discovered punk and post-punk music, and I was saved again. There was something in punk rock anarchy and the dark wave of post-punk that touched my very soul and showed me that I was not all alone in the world, that there was life after darkness. Music was a place I could go with all of my sadness. The lyrics to my favorite Smiths song whispers in my head. And if a double-decker bus crashes into us, to die by your side is such a heavenly way to die. Did I want to die? I wipe at my face and shake my head and decide at that moment under those stinky bleachers that I want to live, that I want out of this pissant town, and I want to prove myself to everyone who gave up on me. I think to myself, all is not lost. I need a plan. I could take my GED and go back to college. I tell myself, you will be okay. Tomorrow is another day. And I'm going to skip a little. It took me years and years, but I finally transferred to UC Riverside. I graduated magna cum laude in 2 years with an English literature degree. I applied to law school on a lark. When the large envelope came in from USC Law School, I knew my life was changing forever, that I would be okay. Almost 2 decades ago, I graduated from USC wearing a cardinal cap and gown. My parents were in the audience with my best friends and my sisters. No longer was I that sad high school dropout under the bleachers. I had made it. After a detour into corporate law, I found my destiny as a deputy public defender, one who represents the most mentally ill in Riverside, California. I've been doing this work for a decade, more than that, and will probably do it for at least a decade more. Whenever I feel it is too much, too traumatic, I think my clients need me. That need is everything. It gives me my purpose. And ironically enough, being a high school dropout is my magic wand. My history is what makes me a great deputy public defender. I have been where my clients are, hopeless, sad, no car, no money, no hope, but I made it out. Recently, I represented one of the saddest clients of my career. Many people would have given up, yet my persistence and visualization for this client made a miracle happen, and he is in a safe place. My clients are all in dire situations, but no matter what their circumstances are, I try and give them hope. I tell my clients what I told myself under the bleachers all those years ago. Tomorrow's another day. You will be okay. I'm sorry.
No, you're fine.
Because they're
No,
not
that's
all okay.
beautiful.
They're just not all of them are okay.
Well, you're definitely doing your best to try to get them there. And I think your story is so inspiring. And the way that, you know, that you were able to make those changes in your life,
Yeah.
even though you took, like you said, took a big detour that made things a lot harder for you. But I think sometimes too, when
Yeah.
you have those harder experiences, I feel that way about harder experiences in my life too, that it's like, you know, I guess I couldn't have learned that any other way than by doing it and by having this difficult experience. And now I've learned and grown from that, and then you move forward. But
oh yeah, and you know, I don't tell all my clients I'm a high school dropout, but I always tell the out of custody clients, look, I was a waitress. I know what it's like to try to get here and have no car and take the bus. So if you need more time, you always call me, you know? Yeah. So.
Well, and I think something that comes through just hearing you read, and we talked a little bit about this before, but so this is a short book, a chat book, and those are often reserved for only poetry.
Oh, yeah.
But your memoir, even just hearing you read it, this is kind of, it has some poetry in it, but it's also a kind of a poetic memoir, and definitely the poetic sound, you know, of your writing comes through in hearing you read. So can you talk a little bit about the kind of the chat book, memoir, poetry, chapbook, and sort of blending those forms?
Yeah, and you know, that's interesting because I was always scared of calling myself a poet. I don't know the forms. I'm just, whatever I do is just my natural poetic voice. I don't know the stanzas, breaks. I don't know any of that. So I took a class with a wonderful teacher named Stephanie Barbie Hammer, and she actually was praising my poetry during the pandemic, some of these poems that are in the book, and she connected me with Mark Gibbons, who owns Pelicanesis from Claremont, which is ironic because I wanted to go to Claremont McKenna and I dropped out. And now my first book is being published by Claremont Press because he did an offshoot called Bamboo Dart Press, which he did in conjunction with a man named Dennis Calici, who runs Shrimper Records. And they decided to do these chapbooks that kind of defy the genre. They might be a little longer, a little shorter. They're going to be a little better produced. They're not, because, they're going to be, some are sewn together. These are not. These are like a book, but it's like a short book. The production value is great. But they are doing all kinds of takes on this chapbook idea, which usually is poetry. So when I started talking to Mark, I said, I have a couple poems, but I have a lot of social justice essays, and I also have memoir pieces. So I love writing essays. Essays are very easy for me to write. Memoir takes a long time for me to write, and then poetry comes out, and it is what it is. So this is a hybrid memoir so I believe there's 3 or 4 social justice essays, which have a little bit of memoir in them. And then there's 2 real memoir pieces that are in young adult voice, sometimes somewhat looking back, but really a young adult narrator telling a story from beginning to end. There's a story called Metamorphosis that based on the Franz Kafka story, the title is, and it's about my transition from goody two shoes to post-punk punk rock princess, like just physically, right? Because my mom was horrified. I was the second girl at my high school to get my nose pierced. I dyed my hair blue black. I started doing really thick Susie Sue eyeliner. I wore combat boots. I wore men's boxers and red thermals underneath with my combat boots, and then a punk rock tee and a thrift store vest. It was all DIY kind of thing. And my prom picture, my boyfriend at the time, my date, I guess I would call him, Kenny, he wore a silver suit and he had a huge mohawk. And then my best friend's guy kind of had like the white short hair with the cane. And so my mom was like, these pictures are horrible. I cannot show them to your tias. And I was like, okay. and it's interesting because that story is how I met one of the women who blurred my book, Michelle Gonzalez, who's part of Spit Boy, this famous punk band from the 90s, all-female punk band. And she was the drummer, the Latina drummer. And I met her at a conference after reading that story, and we became really good friends. So like, it's all connected. Like the world is like us, meaning like the universe is magic. If you open yourself up to it and like you love connecting with people, like if you would have told me 15 years ago, even, and this is when I'm already a lawyer, that I would have 2 books out this year, a podcast, be a deputy public defender doing work I love, be married with a beautiful home, my 2 dogs. I might want to have the child, but other than that, I've gotten everything I wanted. So I'm very blessed. And that's why I have to give back, right?
Yeah. Well, that's awesome.
Yeah.
And I'm glad that you've come to, such a good place in your life, and that you're in such a good place for, helping other people. And I'm just going to show your book again here. So we've got Portrait of a Deputy Public Defender, or How I Became a Punk Rock Lawyer, available for pre-order online. And then it comes out on August 10th. Oh, that's awesome.
This is my little Zoe Bowie Barbie doll.
Oh, nice.
He's my good luck charm.
Oh, that's very cool. Very cool. Do you have any thoughts for fellow writers out there who are working to, try to work on their memoirs or work on their writing and get their stuff out there? What suggestions do you have?
Believe in your voice. Write your stories. Don't censor yourself, and don't let anyone block you. I spent so many years blocking myself and letting others block me, not believing that these stories about this little punk rock high school dropout, that I thought they were juvenile. I'm very influenced by the writing of Judy Blume and S.E. Hinton. I write in a very simple style. I have a lot of dialogue. And I always thought that my writing wasn't good. I don't know why, but I look back, and I've come a long way as a writer, especially with essays. I've taken a lot of craft workshops and stuff like that, and my essays are really strong now. But my memoir pieces, some of the first ones I wrote 15 years ago, are the best. And they're not overworked. They're not over edited. They're very true and raw. So my young adult memoir is a mix of those early and later pieces. Pieces I wrote 15 years ago, pieces I just wrote last year. And I can't really tell the differences, but I can say that you have to just know that you're a good writer. And, editing, someone else can do that for you, but can you tell your story? Are you authentic? Are you going to put blood on the page? And are you going to be true to yourself and your story? I only tell my story. I don't tell my sister's story. I don't tell my mom's story and my dad's story. I want to tell my mom and dad's story eventually in another book. I want to do research for that, but believe in your voice. Believe in it, because it's everything. James Joyce, do you know how many, he's one of my idols. He wrote Dubliners, Portrait of the Artist, Ulysses, Finnegan's Wake. Everyone said, he dealt with censorship. He dealt with people saying that his writing was, people couldn't understand it. He dealt with poverty. He lost his eyesight. He had a schizophrenic daughter. And look how his work is looked at now, right? Look at Harry Potter. She wrote that book and was rejected how many times? And don't waste your time looking for an agent. Don't waste your time looking for someone that can take money from you. You can do that eventually if you really want that, or maybe they'll come to you. But I spent a year doing that, and it was a waste of my time, and I never found one. And the minute I let that go and said, if I have to self-publish, I'll self-publish. I'm fine with that. That's when I just finished the stuff and the presses came. You can always pitch a small press. You can always pitch a small press your book. You don't need to go big literary, the top 5 publishing companies. Those books take years to come out. And really, if you just want your voice out there, start a blog, start a podcast.
Right.
Write a story and get it published in a local magazine. So I would just say, know that your voice has value. That's believing in yourself. It sounds cheesy, but it is everything. Once you believe in yourself and your worth, don't wait till you're 50 like me. Do it when you're 30, 35, 25, 20. I mean, don't be cocky. You can always work on stuff, but don't over edit. I have over edited some pieces in my long memoir that I've had to go back to the original and do a soft edit, because the later version, it's too over edited and you can see that it's overworked. So my best pieces come out almost full. I go into a trance when I write, and I just write. And my best stories come out in one day in maybe 6 hours, and I'll edit them later. But I think that writing is magic, and you have to allow yourself to reach your soul. If you're going to be fiction is different. I'm talking about nonfiction when you're trying to trigger memories and you're trying to write about trauma and hard things in your life. Just write the stories. Don't worry about what anyone's going to say. Just write it. You can worry about that stuff later, like I am now.
Thank you. That's great. That's great advice of just staying true to your voice and believing in it. And then just, again, the whole idea that you can't edit a blank page, and your story is really the only thing, that you have,
I've never heard that. You can't edit a blank page.
I can't take credit for that. I saw that as like a meme or something on Facebook, but I saved it to my phone because as somebody who's, been working on a memoir again for over a decade and trying to slog through and figure out what this is and let it evolve and all that. But I think there's really a lot to be said for that too, that it's like, and I think that's the point that you made so much more eloquently than I am right now. But
no, Jane, you're the perfect example, is that, you're doing this podcast and you're promoting other writers, but in the process, you're really helping yourself because, this writing community, there's nothing like it. Writers are the coolest people you will ever meet. Always. Any other profession, writers are the coolest. Maybe jazz musicians. But other than that, creative people, let's say creative people generally.
Yeah.
Are very so I really connected with you the minute I met you, and I love your writing, and I think that your book is going to be fabulous, and you're going to you're going to get it out there. I can see it. I see it in your future.
Well, thank you.
And I don't read cards.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate your support. And again, I appreciate you liking my writing, and I appreciate you coming on this show and just sharing your thoughts and your experiences with us and doing readings. So I just so appreciate having you here. And thank you just for
I've
taking
never
this time
cried during a reading, so I'm not a crybaby, people.
But that's not a sign of weakness either. It's a sign that you feel, you feel deeply what you're talking about and what you're relating to us. And again, I think that's a beautiful thing.
Well, I don't think I've read that story live recently at a writer's festival, and I was fine. But I think because we're talking so much about my clientele, that when I started reading that part, I really thought that a lot of them are not okay. I might try to give them hope, but they're not doing okay. And it's very sad for me. And so I'm just going to, let's all say, like, send love and light to all of those who are incarcerated. Because I think it's important, no matter what someone's done, they are not their worst act. They are someone's brother, someone's sister, someone's friend. They were born, right? They're God's child. Mm-hmm. So that's how I feel about my clients. They're all, and they say that the intellectually disabled are spies for God, right? How we treat the most powerless in our society is who we are as a society.
Amen.
Yeah, amen. That's a good one.
Yeah.
I'm trying to look at these comments.
Oh yeah. We've got some great ones. I love the one from Gina here. I'll show that on the screen. She used to go to Barnes and Noble and read an entire book in the store. # college days.
I was so poor, I couldn't buy books. And I'm sorry, Barnes and Noble. I read really quick. So if there was a book and it was like maybe a couple hundred pages, not 700, couple hundred pages, I can read that in a few hours. So, and I don't speed read. I just read fast. And I actually, when I was little, my mom taught me and my twin to read when we were 3. So by like age 6, I would be in class and they say, read this paragraph. And I'd be like, you're not done. Yes, I am. You're not done. Yes, I am. What is it saying? I would tell them. They'd be like, oh, okay. So eventually they gave up. But I used to have to slow down my reading so that I wasn't weird. Like I took the bar exam and I was done like 45 minutes early. It's just because I'm a fast reader and I have good processing. Yeah, so it's weird. And I'm a good test taker always. I don't know why. It's just.
Good for you. I wish I had that skill. I don't know that that's what I excel at.
But now at 50, I have too many music lyrics in my head, so my memory is going. So that's the problem.
But music lyrics are a great thing to have in your head. So
I think in music lyrics, yeah. I'm trying to think of one right now to end the show.
Well, thank you so much, Juanita, for being here. I so appreciate you, and I wish you all the best with your work. And let me show this again. So we've got Portrait of a Deputy Public Defender, or How I Became a Punk Rock Lawyer, coming out on August 10th. It is available for pre-order online, and the link should be there. If not, we'll make sure to share that afterward. And then we'll also look for your.
It's only $8. It's a steal. Buy one, buy two, give them away to people that need to be educated in this mass incarceration system. BambooDarkPress.com. There's a lot of other chapbooks on there. The one that I had the guy on recently, memoir. This is a musical memoir told in chapbook form. Again, a take on the chapbook. It's not poetry. There's no poetry. And then Stephanie Barbie Hammer, who I was talking about, just real quick, if I could show her book, Rescue Plan. This is fiction, and it's a chapbook.
Oh, nice.
So they're kind of playing with the form of it, right? This is 50 pages. This is 60 pages. Mine is about 70. Mine kind of goes over the limit but sorry.
No, you're good. Yeah. No, you're good. And is there a title on your YA memoir that's coming out later this year?
It is. It's Tales of an Inland Empire Girl by Los Nietos Press. It will come out in November. Worst case scenario, December. Right after my 50th birthday. And it's about 220 pages or so. And it really goes so it starts with my dad's death is the very first story. And then I flash back to my childhood, and it goes from age 4 to age 18 when I drop out. Then it flash forwards to now to being in junior college and living with my parents in a trailer in Pomona. And then it flashes forward to my dad's funeral. So it's kind of like, wild how you kind of throw the shoe and you flash back. I went through so many iterations of how to structure it. Structuring is really hard for me. Finally, I just went with this, and it's fun.
No, that's good. That sounds like a good framework for telling the story that you came up with. So,
and then I added poems at the end, at the last minute. I had this manuscript of poetry that I had become a semi-finalist for a contest in, and I thought, okay, I'm just going to send it to my editor, and he's like, yeah, we can put most of this in. So we added some poetry at the end, poems that I had was put in a drawer and were never going to put out anywhere else. So it's great. It's great. And they're all about my dad's death mostly, and how I dealt with that, and all my regret I have about not spending. I was a corporate lawyer in San Francisco when he died, and I didn't really see him the last 2 years of his life. I didn't know they were the last 2 years of his life, but I just wish I had moved home sooner.
Oh, sure.
Yeah. Yeah.
Sure.
I miss my dad. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So anyways, yeah.
And people can also find you on your Life of Gem podcast, right?
Yes, I have a Life of Gem Facebook page, and everything is on my author website, Juanita, Juanita, emantz.com. JuanitaEmantz.com. I'm the only Juanita Mantz left. There was an older lady in Idaho named Juanita Mantz, but I'm the only Juanita Mantz left, so I'm really easy to find. She was 97, I think, when she passed. So.
Oh, wow.
We weren't related, but
yeah.
Juanita is Mexican equivalent to John, and my dad's name was John, so that's Juanita, and then that's a Mexican first name, and then Mantz is German and Yugoslavian, Mancevic. It was shortened, so Juanita E. Mantz, which is Gem, Jem, my initials.
Right. Very nice.
Okay.
Well, thank you again so
I love
much.
you. Thank you.
I'm sure we could just keep talking all afternoon, but but thank you so much. I'm just wishing you all the best with your work, and I look forward to staying in touch with you and sharing writing and continuing to support each other. So thank you for all that
maybe
you do.
You'll come on my show next season, and I can turn the tables and make you cry.
Oh, it would be easy to do, I'm sure. Especially if you get into my past life experiences. So anyway, but thank you so much for being here today. Go get Juanita's book, Portrait of a Deputy Public Defender, and we'll see you next week. Thanks so much, everybody. Bye.